check where we're on. Hey everybody, this is Ben Atkinson from LinkedIn, and this is our series of interviews on inspiring leadership and challenging times. So anybody watching, please like, share, comment, even just to say hi so we know who's on board and we can name check you and get you involved in the proceedings. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine. He's a leadership expert and coach to CEOs and boards across the globe, Jonathan Bowman-Perks. Welcome. Great to have you on board. Who are we interviewing this week?
Thanks, Ben, and welcome to my favorite time of the week as part of this Inspiring Leadership in Challenging Times. And I've asked John Cresswell, the CEO of the Bibby Line Group, to join us today, share his experiences and stories, and he's got a great deal of wisdom. John's been at senior roles in many top organizations. He's been the COO and the interim CEO of ITV, seen that through some challenging times in the financial crisis. He's also been the CEO of Arqiva, a technology and telecoms and media company, and now Bibby Line Group with 213 years of experience and a real diverse range of businesses, a family-run business. So, John, over to you. Great to have you on board. Tell us a bit about yourself and Bibby Line.
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me, Jonathan. Great to see you. So, Bibby is, as you say, a 213-year-old family business. It's still has the sixth generation involved, and hopefully we'll have the seventh generation involved. Always been headquartered in Liverpool. Had its traditions in shipping, coming out of Liverpool post-slavery. I would add. They're very keen to point that out. And now we've diversified into 5 principal businesses. We have a quite remarkable financial services business. We loan about £1 billion a month to SMEs. We're the largest independent factoring business in the UK. We own Cost Cutter, which provides retail skills and wholesale product to 1,500 convenience stores across the UK, which is obviously playing a big part at the moment. We have 2 shipping accommodation businesses. We have a logistics, Bibby distribution, warehouse and distribution. And we own Garrick, which provides welfare accommodation to the building sector.
Great. And John,
so it is pretty diverse.
It certainly is. And you've been through a lot of challenges. You've seen teams you've been with struggle with difficult issues. Clearly, at the moment, while we're talking about the coronavirus and its impact on the economy and businesses and people's lives, that's one thing. But we get these wicked problems. We get crises. We get things that really challenge us. Two areas I'm interested in. One, the sort of survive and thrive. The survive, what do you do about preparing and predicting or doing some risk management of things that could go wrong? And had you seen this kind of thing happening? And then secondly, how do you thrive? How do you respond when you actually have got the crisis? And how do you prepare, a bit like we talked about in our days in the military, the Iraq war, and people weren't thinking about the peace afterwards. So how do you prepare now for emerging from it and coming out from the opportunities that will emerge in the different ways of working? Do you want to talk a bit about both of those, surviving and thriving?
Yeah, so let's talk about surviving. So look, most businesses have a risk register, just as the government does, I guess, and the pandemic wasn't on ours, I'll be honest. And I guess the challenge we face with this particular crisis is that it's affected, not just nationally but globally, and affected colleagues, customers, all at the same time. So it's highly unusual. So we started to do, the jobs the CEOs start to think about this early. So generally in January we started to think, okay, if this became real, what could it be? Were we fast enough? Probably not. And that's a kind of lesson learned. But really, it's about understanding how you can prepare the organization for it and doing some scenario planning. And then, as the situation develops, which scenario do you find yourself in? And luckily we've done that. We concentrated on three things: keeping our colleagues safe and their welfare, being agile and flexible about our working with our customers, and then thinking about liquidity and cash. Now, as we're moving through, exactly as you say, we're starting to think about how do we come out of this. And there are two or three areas. One is, what have we learned? I'm sure most people in business who are sitting at home working remotely will have started to pull together with their teams a few really good lessons of how we can work differently and hopefully better in the future. And then how do we bring colleagues who have been working at home sometimes for 4 or 5 weeks back into the business? Some have been furloughed, some are working remotely, some have been shielding, some obviously sadly have been ill. And so there's a lot of issues to start thinking around. That is our next phase. We're starting that now, thinking, okay, we're not sure when it will be, but what are our issues going to be that we can see now? So it is about planning and making it someone's day job.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And you've reminded me of two things that came out very clearly from my 20 years in the military, where we were always dealing with crises and problems and wars and things like that. One was AAR, after action reviews, and the second one was wargaming. The after action review, as soon as anything had happened, and Ben and I have talked about this before when we were at Cass Business School together in the classes we were doing on his exec MBA, that you, as soon as you have something, you get people together, what worked well, what will make it even better, what is our lessons from it? And people often fail to have these after action reviews at any stage and to learn from things. They're constantly moving on. It either worked or it didn't, and they sort of move on. But you've got to think, what have we learned? What are we going to, learning and action, those two things. The second one was wargaming. We used to have what we'd call a bird table, a large table where we'd have the map of the UK or something like that. And we'd move different counters and pieces on it, like in one of those sort of RAF films from the Second World War with people pushing different pieces. But everybody's standing around playing different emergency planning organizations, or the police, the fire, the service, the army, what would happen and what were we dealing with. And I think wargaming or scenario planning is key. Any thoughts that come up on after action reviews and wargaming from your point of view, John?
Well, look, scenario planning, we're absolutely in that at the moment. And just saying, okay, so 3 weeks ago or a month ago, what do we think the world may look like? What have we learned? What's different? So how do we adjust our scenario? We may have thought we'd be back at the end of May. What happens in September? End of the year. So scenario planning and being able to adjust and looking at leading indicators to say, okay, so if something is trending that way, what are the triggers we look out for when we have to take the next action?
Yeah.
And I guess as a CEO, my job is to look for the iceberg. So I often find myself playing Jonah in the meetings by saying, yeah, but what if? Don't be complacent. Let's think about the worst case. And if we can deal with the worst case, and anything above that is better. So it is challenging the teams to often take slightly tougher decisions or have a plan for a tough decision than they may want to take themselves.
Brilliant, John. Thank you. And later on, we're going to talk in part 2. We're going to talk about your life and your father, who was an inspiring leader. But you had one particular leader who you described as inspiring, coped well in crises. Who would that be? And do you want to talk about the qualities?
Yeah, so the person I've chosen, who I worked for many years, is Charles Allen, who's now Lord Allen. And it was a difficult time in ITV. We'd had you got a difficult ad revenue time, and Charles was stepping down from the business. But all through the difficult times, the way he carried himself and the way that he gave others confidence in the future, I'm now, going to understand what it would have taken personally for him to have done that. So he was always positive, never let, I'm sure he was racked with the same, challenges and anxieties, but he just led from the front. And certainly as he was leaving the organization, which he created, helped to create, it spent, 15 years of his life doing it. He was fantastic. It was all about the company, all about the team, nothing about him. And I just thought it was a very remarkable, public display of leadership to allow an organization, to continue on.
Yeah, very, very special. And also leaders need great teams. And think of a time when you were with a really good team who worked together well, collaborated, looked after each other. They weren't toxic teams. They were a really good, inspiring team in a crisis, in a challenge. Which would you choose?
Well, I've been lucky. I've worked with some fantastic people, for some fantastic people, and with some fantastic people. I guess the thing about a crisis is it gives you a goal, and it's a very clear goal, and you can set those goals, which are generally about, surviving and, managing through the least collateral damage. So getting the best outcome. So the one I would choose is when the financial crisis hit ITV in 08-09, and suddenly, our ad revenue fell through the floor, quite frankly, just 20 or 30% down month on month, and we didn't know how long that was continue. So as an exec team, we pulled together, but I had two people. We had an inner cabinet. There were three of us, really. Had a fantastic strategy director who I worked with, Carolyn Fairburn, Dame Carolyn Fairburn now, who's the DG of the CBI, and the finance director at the time, who went on to do a terrific job for ITV, Ian Griffiths. And we were very supportive. We challenged each other. We had different, skills, and, we worked it through. And I think having that, and with the wider executive team at the time, were able to take that business through kind of existential crisis, really. And that was good. Because there were, you had to leave your ego outside the door, and you had to think of other people, and support each other, but being able to challenge and support, and then get on and execute.
Yeah, very
and
good.
Take an organisation with you.
Great. And John, people, as well as hearing about teams and inspiring leaders, we always love a good story. We don't want to be too serious in these desperate times. We always need a bit of levity. And I think of sort of military humor and when things go bad and how people keep cheerful. But what about your stories that would make you smile when you think back to them, how people handle things? What were the couple of stories you'd share? So, assuming I'll have to use some political correctness on the language, and some of them I won't share. But there was one at Arqiva where I joined in 2011. Then we were running the digital switchover from analog to digital for the whole of the UK for free-to-air TV and radio, which was a 600 million multi-year project, and very technically complex. And just after at the start of 2012, I got a phone call to say we've had a fire at the Crystal Palace transmitter. I said, okay, well, so, can we fix it? It's not supposed to be switched over to April or May. And they said, yes. Anyway, about the next day, I get a call from the Secretary of State, DCMS, and then one from the Chief Executive Ofcom asking me what the status was. I really hadn't appreciated the severity of the situation, because what it meant, if we hadn't got Crystal Palace switched at that time, not only did it cover the maximum about 15 million households or something, 12 million probably in the UK, but also when it switched over, it allowed the spectrum for broadcasters to use for the Olympics, which were coming later that summer. So I suddenly realized what was at stake. Anyway, had a fantastic engineer who led the team. So I man-marked the top of the organizations were stakeholders, and he ran everything else. And I said, okay, Peter, I'm not an engineer, I know nothing about this. Can we do it? What, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think? And he said 9.
I thought, oh, well, that's pretty good, isn't it? He's an engineer. He's not going to, he's data driven. He's not going to fib anyway. Afterwards, we did it, and they did a terrific job. And afterwards, I said, Peter, thank you so much for giving me confidence. And I said, because I didn't know what's going on. By giving me 9 out of 10, that was terrific. It gave me a huge amount of confidence that, because I trust you implicitly. And he said, well, of course, it wasn't 9. Oh, God. What was it then? He said, well, actually, John, it was 9.5. But I didn't want to appear cocky at the time because I thought you wouldn't have believed me. Look, I think the story is, you've got to trust the people you trust. You cannot, I think often it's the temptation in a crisis is to delve down and get right into the detail. But my job, was to say, right, Peter, I trust you. I can't do your job. I've got to stay up here and, keep up, on the balcony or the bridge, whatever you want to call it. And just, who do I manage? Well, okay, I can manage the Secretary of State, I can manage my chairman, and I can manage the CEO of Ofcom. And keep those lines of communication open, and you get on and solve the problem.
Very good. Very good advice. I love it. I love the story. And what was the second story?
No, we talked about it then. I can't remember what it is now.
It'll come back to us. We'll come back to us. But while we're doing that, and we'll talk about it in part 2 with your dad. Ben, over to you, really, for some sort of check-in. Anybody's come in, some quick-fire questions.
Great. Yep. So, hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So if you could like, share, comment, that'd be fantastic. It'd be great to be able to name check a few people and get some questions coming in. So while we're sort of waiting for that, I wanted to just shift gears a little bit and do some a little quick fire round for you, John. So what we're going to look at is, I think the most successful people have some habits that they do all the time, which really sort of help them to be successful, which help them to be a good leader. So we're going to look at 3 areas. So healthy, wealthy, and wise. Are you ready? Quick fire round.
Ready.
Okay, good. Okay, so obviously you've been in real sort of high pressure environments and positions for some time. What's the one thing that you have to do that keeps you sane and healthy?
Exercise. It's probably a paradox, but when I'm more stressed, I'm probably healthier, really, because I need that release of, whether it's a run, a cross train in the gym, out on my bike. I just need that release of just not being in front of a screen, not having a phone with me, and just out there, letting my mind wander and think things through. And if I don't have that, then my tendency is just to work harder and harder and harder. And really, you just, kind of pulling yourself down. So I need to exercise, get out, fresh air.
Yeah, otherwise it pulls down.
It may not look it. It may not look it. Everything's relative.
You're looking great, John. Don't worry about it. So the second one is on wealthy. So I just want to know any piece of advice that you've had or that you give about money that you've really found useful.
So look, I think in business, it's all about how you allocate your resources. And so I have a phrase which is, you can only spend £1 once. So, you've got to choose where you want to allocate those resources for the best return, because you can't fulfill everything. And actually, one of management's key tasks is the allocation of resources. And therefore, you've got to be as efficient and as productive as possible, which gives you more opportunity to spend that £1 on something that's going to create value.
Great advice. Good, strong. So the third and final one is on wisdom. So is there a piece of wisdom, a motto or a credo that you use or strive to use to live your life by?
Yeah, so over the years, I think the one thing that I always try and do is, and in private and professional life, is control the controllables. But there will be things that happen to me that are outside of my control. whether that's in business or personal. The pandemic is one of those. I can't control them. What is it under my control? And, so just as, staying healthy, I know that in the day I can control, what I eat. Well, I'm not very disciplined in that, how much exercise I get, how many hours I spend in front of a screen. You have to try and control those things and get the balance right. And then, how one reacts to a particular situation, so control the controllables. Don't sweat the small stuff, and don't worry about things that I cannot control. It took a long while to learn that, I think.
Fantastic pieces of advice. I love it. Love it. So we've got a question here from Don McIntyre. So he says, do you have any tips for a leader in a discipline such as cybersecurity on how they can influence the board, ensure they are aware of risks, and ensure they take this seriously and invest in it to the right level?
Good to hear from Don. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. First, I'm surprised that any board in the UK doesn't take cybersecurity seriously. But if you're struggling with that, I think that the thing about cyber is, it's an arms race, really, because the more that we build our security, the greater the threat becomes. For me, I always start with, where are we today? And how do we benchmark against our peers? There are government standards. There are, certification levels you can get on levels of security. So the first thing I would do is to assess where we are and say to the board, right, actually, this is what good looks like. We're here or we're here. And depending on where we are, that's the level of risk. And, what as a board are we going to do about that? And that's got to drive the level of investment. But it's always starting to assess where we stand today, and then making the argument about going forward. But benchmarking is really, really important. There are plenty of opportunities. Government websites will set certain levels. You can get some consultants in who will help benchmark for you. But then just building the case, because you could spend a huge amount, but having where are we today? Where do we think we should be, and what's the road to get there, and what's it going to cost, and the risk reward of doing it or not doing it.
There's a second part to his question, which is quite interesting, because he makes the observation that when a cyber team, for example, are being really successful, the demonstration of success is actually nothing happening. So how do you keep that investment going and prove that it's doing its job when the proof of the pudding is we're not having any problems?
Look, I think it is just to keep reiterating, success breeds success. Well, if we're doing something right, so we need to do more of it. If it's a positive thing and it's helping, one of the things, as soon as we started remote working, we made everyone re-go through their cyber training security, because the number of phishing attacks and emails we had in the first 2 weeks just went off the scale.
Really?
Yeah, even my chairman sent me an email and said, what is it you want to talk about? And I said, he said about this acquisition. what acquisition? I don't know what you're talking about. And we've had two, there are so many attacks coming now that I just think you've got to just keep reinforcing and that benchmarking. Okay, if the world is moving up, we're all becoming better at it, and making sure back down the supply chain and everywhere that your perimeter is as secure as it can be, and your colleagues, you're in the business, your first line of defense, and they've got to understand what that means.
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah. So just final question. So obviously Bibby Line have been around for over 200 years, which is an amazing achievement for any business. So they've experienced a number of wars. They've experienced a number of economic downturns. They've even experienced a global pandemic before in 1918. Is there anything that modern businesses should learn from a business like the Bibby Line Group about achieving that sort of longevity?
Well, the family would probably be the better people to ask. I kind of worked out if I worked there for 5 years, I'll probably be like a 3-line sentence in the book of the 200 years.
Yeah.
But I think look, they think long term. Okay, they assess risk, and they have very strong values. And so, the values that we espouse, come back to it. Great colleague engagement, how we, treat our colleagues, fantastic customer service. If you've got very good colleague engagement and you have great customer, net promoter score, customer engagement, those two factors are great sustainability factors for taking any business through. Because if you've got those two things working with you, then even through the downtimes, your colleagues will stay loyal and committed, and hopefully, your customers will give you a bit of leeway because of the service that you're providing them. If you don't have both those things, I think your chances of getting through a crisis are much tougher.
Mm.
And if I could just come in, John, and build on what you said, if you haven't read yet, you and I talk about different books that are worth reading, and Ben and I do too. Simon Sinek writes some very good material on getting to why, but his recent book, which I'm enjoying as an audiobook, is The Infinite Game. And that many companies at the moment are playing the finite game. Think about this quarter, or maybe this half year, and they're making all these decisions, laying people off, slashing, burning, just to stay alive. Whereas someone like Bibby Line Group plays the infinite game. It thinks about the next generation and the generation after that. And we saw that, John. You also know C. Hoare & Co. with Alexander and the family thinking about those generations. And I'm a member of the Goldsmiths Company, which is 700 years old, and we think long term. So I think in many ways, Bibby Line Group with the infinite game, that view of the longer game, is far healthier for all stakeholders rather than just shareholders making as much cash as they can, stripping, burning, whatever it might be. What's your thought? Infinite versus finite game?
Well, look, I think, family businesses are different because they have the disadvantage that you can't automatically raise capital because it's quite a rights issue from the family, which either they have the money or they have to kind of dilute their shareholding. But on the second hand, they don't, not all of them will need an ongoing level of return like a public company may do. So they're pros and cons. And I think, at the moment, depending on which sector you're in, some companies have to slash and burn. ITV in 0809, we had to lose a lot of staff, sadly, because, we just did not have the liquidity to get through. So I wouldn't necessarily criticize people for doing that. However, I think where, a company like Bibby has been successful over the years, and they've ridden so many different, cycles, is they are prepared to have fallow years whilst they rebuild. I think in the public sector or the private sector, PLC world, top FTSE 100, you don't get that chance. You don't get that chance really, which is why some companies are better taken private and, kind of transformed and then put back onto the market, because it's very difficult to do it in a public space.
So final question from the feed. This is a slightly different one. It's from Venkat Sai, and he's just starting out his career. So he's just out of university and obviously hitting a really hard job market, an almost impossible job market at the moment. And he's just asking for any advice for a new starter like himself. Firstly, meeting a job market like this and how to be looking at being successful in his career.
Okay, so I do one of the things that gives me a huge amount of pleasure. I do something called Speakers for Schools, where I go and talk to kids, generally underprivileged state schools, and I have a kind of 4 or 5 pieces of advice for people. So with Venkat at the moment, if it is a really difficult job market, don't give up, don't lose hope. Okay, it can, there'll be a job out there for you. It may take a bit of a while, but you'll get one. I'm confident of that. I think once you get in, some of the things. So first, be polite and respectful to everyone up and down the chain. Okay, so that is first rule. Just respect everyone. They come to do their job. So that kind of is rule 1. Rule 2 is never stop asking questions. Okay, so don't be afraid to ask questions. We kind of spend the first few years of our life asking why the sky is blue, the grass is green, and we get into meetings and we sit there, we've got no idea what's going on, or no idea what an acronym means, and you sit there. Never.
We've got a million acronyms at LinkedIn that do.
I don't understand what that means. Can you explain what that means? Otherwise it's pointless. So don't stop asking questions. Volunteer. I've had two of the kind of most greatest fun and opportunities I've had in my career are through volunteering and actually being proactive and say, look, can I help you? Believe me, as a CEO, not many people come and say, can I help you? They bring you problems rather than pay. So, that's always just really important. And then, if someone asks you to do something and you don't understand or you can't do it, say up front. Don't wait 2 weeks and say, I'm sorry, I didn't have time. Just say, look, okay, can you just really explain what it is you want so I can deliver what it is you want, and by the way, this is the time frame, and then deliver it. So there's, certain things, and don't gossip. Don't be an office gossip, and don't play politics.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Those are really good. Just staying with it for a minute, John, I think there's a really good points that you've shared. And really to build on it with another bit of wisdom I picked up from Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was a newsreader in America, and he said that in the 1929 depression, and this will be a depression that we're going to go through now, people were desperate for a job. Just give me, I'll do any job. Just give me a job. I want a job. Give me. They didn't get jobs. But he said there was a few people that he knew that always got jobs. And the reason they got a job was they actually studied, rather than a shotgun effect everywhere, they studied about 3 organizations and they really researched. Now, in those days, they didn't have the internet, but they used their contacts, people who worked there. They found out as much as they could about the CEO's problems and what was keeping him awake at night. And literally had the goal to try and somehow get to see that person and say, I've been studying your organization. I know about some of the problems you've got, and I've got 1 or 2 ideas that might be helpful. Could we meet for half an hour for a coffee? And in nearly all cases, he had the meeting. And in nearly all cases, when he was at the meeting, he offered to work for free for the first month. So let me work for free. And if I'm of value, please take me on and start paying me. If not, I will have learned a lot for you. But whether you can do that in the current climate and all the rules and regulations about, you can't take interims on who aren't paid and all that kind of stuff. But the point was, don't be desperate about it. Research your company, know your target. And we used to say in the military, know your enemy, and offer something which adds value and solves the problem that's keeping them awake. What's your thoughts, John?
I agree. And to build on that, I say when I'm talking to these kids and answering the questions, it comes back control the controllables, about what you can do. So, this is now they're younger, so they're going for internships and jobs. I say, right, you can control what time you get there. Okay, don't ever be late, because you can do your route the day before. Control what you look like. Are you smart? Are your shoes clean? Because you may not think those things matter, they matter. The obvious questions, you're going to get asked some really obvious questions. Test them with each other. Do your research exactly. What is the job? Do you know who this person is? If you use so much information you can find on the internet about companies, and issues. So those are things you can control. And if they let you down, then, it's your kind of, it's on your own back, really.
Great advice. Ben, any more before I talk?
Great stuff. No, that's it for the moment. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Venkat. Thanks for all those people who are listening right now. And again, just like, share, comment, even if it's just to say hello. It's great to know when people are watching.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And John, we're just perhaps we'll probably finish at about 45 minutes, so maybe about 5 or 10 more minutes of this session. A bit about your life, John. If you were to just pick out 1 or 2 bits from your life and the experiences in challenging times that shaped you as the leader you are, because the lovely thing about you is you're very modest about the way you inspire people, quiet, thoughtful, more of the introvert rather than the brash extrovert, which, interestingly enough, many very successful leaders are much more introverts than extroverts. They don't have to be like Donald Trump, thank God. But what would you talk about your life and your experiences in challenging times? What shaped you? And talk also about your dad.
Look, I think a lot of people are shaped by the people around them, in their early years. I think, certainly for myself and my brothers, we're very fortunate. My father, started off from very humble beginnings, and just had a work ethic and a ethos that, let him, get to university, and then have a terrific career at IBM. So he went from living in the south of England to then traveling the world within having never been outside the country, probably still traveling across the US, living in the US. So he was and he had a very strong faith and was good at many sports. So it's sickening in a way, but no. So he was a real role model, role model for me and my brothers, and I think I've always tried with everyone I've worked for to try and pick out what is good and what is bad, and I've been very fortunate to work in creative industries with people who are completely different from me. They are flamboyant, they're creative, they're inspirational in how they lead teams. And I think I've hopefully tried to learn some of the good things. I'll tell you, my first job when I left, I qualified as an accountant with what is now KPMG, and I went into a TV company, one of the regional TV companies. I think I'd been there about 4 months, and it was getting up to results day, and the CEO came on all the TVs. They could play all the TV screens through the building, and he came on and he said, well, it's really tough times. Advertising is very difficult. We're going through recession, low inflation, blah, blah, blah. So we're all going to have to tighten our belts, and it's going to be, a bit serious and a bit tough. But I can't stay long because the helicopter's waiting to take me to London. Okay. And at that moment, everyone knew it wasn't that serious. Or there was no leadership in saying, I just thought you've got to walk the talk. And as a leader, everything that you do is watched, and whether it's the phrase the shadow that we cast, but people will watch how leaders in organizations behave, and if they aren't being authentic or they're not following through on what they say and leading by example, I think it becomes apparent very, very quickly. And I think from, going back to my father, he was always, very consistent about the values that he had.
Yeah, it's a very powerful story. And what about your learning from dark times, and maybe when you got things badly wrong as a leader? What did you learn from that, and how has that shaped you today as a leader from picking up and learning from the mistakes you've made or difficult times you've had?
Yeah, everyone makes mistakes, and you're going to fail. I kind of, whether that's the organisation fails and you're made redundant, or your job comes to an end, or you're taken over and you've got nowhere to go. It is tough. You can't be afraid. Well, you will fail. Everyone will fail, and everyone will have knockbacks, and it's how you bounce back, really. So I went through a very difficult time. My elder brother died. I was having a difficult personal life, and then both my parents died, and I guess that was probably the blackest time. And you've got to somehow push your way through it, really, and find out what are those things that you can hold on to. For me, work was one of them. I started a new job partly way through that. So that was something to throw myself into, keeping fit, and then having the support of friends and family, and not being afraid to ask for advice.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. Is, it's seen, you go, it's, and I guess people of my generation conditioned, you're nowadays we're encouraged to show vulnerability. Well, believe me, when you're at school, the last thing you wanted to do was show vulnerability, because people would just kind of hone in on it, and your life will become miserable. But now I think it is right to talk about these things, because everyone is going through them. No one. The facade people may look at perfect lives, but everyone is going through something. As Robin Williams said, be kind to everyone. You don't know what they're going through.
Very wise. Very wise.
And I think in terms of mistakes, I think the things that I've learned are, and some of the things that people like Charles Allen, who I picked out, just understood people. Just really understood people. And I think previously, when I was going through tough times, I probably wasn't as understanding of how, the impact on others as I could have been.
Yeah.
Really, probably could have been a bit brutal.
Yeah. So before we hand over to Ben for any final questions and the wrap up with Ben's question about your recommended book, what would be one of the highlights of your life and your career, and why was it so special to you?
I've had so many. I've been so fortunate. Highlights. All it's when you set a goal and you work with a team and you've come through a difficult period and you kind of succeed together. And that can be, in Arqiva, we did a big refinancing. The pride in the team of doing the digital switchover, ITV, so many amazing creative people, and the success that they had, on screen and worldwide. And they, through some really difficult times. I'll tell you one example, which was very early in my career, when I was part of the ITV system. We made a program called Hornblower.
Yeah.
And Hornblower was, at the time, the most expensive drama made for TV, but unintentionally, okay, because it went hugely over budget. So it's being filmed in the Crimea, and now, the Russian winters had seen off Napoleon, Stalin, were they going to see us off? So anyway, the schedule got behind, and the exec producer, fantastic lady called Michelle Buck, came and said, "Look, we've got a problem. So it's going to cost us £2 million more to make this show over budget. So we're going to lose 2 million. She said, we could stop now and write off the 2 million that we have spent. So I thought, well, that's, what a great choice that is. So anyway, we went ahead and I kind of made the case to the board that we should go ahead and overspend by 2 million, because at least then we had something to show for it at the end of it. And that was a great learning for me. So I backed the team, and we did it. And it actually was extremely successful. And there were 3 or 4 series of it with Robert Lindsay and Johan Griffith. But we did get a lot of flack from the group CEO. It was quite tough, actually. And it was quite tough on us. But when we won an Emmy or something, anyway, we gave it to him to put in his office. And so I learned 2 or 3 lessons. One about managing up, and success has many fathers. And then just about backing a team and taking some tough decisions. But it didn't feel funny at the time. But anyway.
No, fantastic. Ben, last couple of minutes, over to you.
Great. That was brilliant, John. Thanks so much for joining us. That has been a really interesting story, some great advice, and really appreciate it. Just sort of final, just wrap up to say thanks to the people who've watched. Thanks for the questions. Thanks to Venkat and Don for putting some questions up. And we're going to be doing this every week, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Please join us, join in, suggest people that we might interview. But sort of final question, John. Everybody loves a book recommendation. It'd be great to get your current recommendation, something that might have been formative in your life, or just something you're reading right now.
Okay, well, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you two, Ben. So the first is Bleak House, which was a book I had to read for my A-levels. Not only is it 900 pages, which I managed to get through, but I think in terms of storytelling and, the narrative, the art, story arcs and the characters and built in is still the best, most complete novel I've ever read. So I'd recommend that to everyone, particularly if you've got a few hours to spare while you've been locked down.
Great for lockdown, yeah.
Yeah. The second is The Chimp Paradox. And I read that when I was going through a bit of a dark time, probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. And I wish I'd read it 10, 15 years earlier, because it just really helped me to understand and get things in perspective and, build a philosophy around that and not get, the chimp sitting on my shoulder jabbering away at me. So I would recommend that to anyone. So Venkat, people looking for jobs at the start of your career, I wish I'd read that at the start of my career. Might not have been may have helped me cope with some of the pressures that you have.
Yeah, great recommendation. So did that change your behavior at all? I know it did when I read it.
Yeah, it did. Absolutely. Well, it started to explain. I thought it's a great book because it can make puts the complex into kind of simple language and the concepts. And it really did. So when I get those paranoias now, I think, well, hold on, just stand back, take a breath. What are you really dealing with? And what assumptions are you making or hypotheses are you building? And, just don't fly off the handle or believe it.
Well, John, can I just say on behalf of Ben and myself, thank you very much. Having John Cresswell, the Group CEO of Bibby Line Group, on this series is very good. Episode 3. Episode 4, for those looking forward to next Tuesday, we got Lieutenant General James Battle, who did airborne training in P Company with me and was one of the finest leaders, both in battle and in peacetime. He's also been a round the world sailor recently. Then we've got on Tuesday, the 5th of May, Richard Pfennig, who was the CEO of Control Risks and is now an advisor to boards. Then on the 12th of May, Tuesday, the 12th of May, Mark Hodgkinson, who's the CEO of the charity Scope, and followed by Lieutenant General Sir Nick Pope, who was the former Deputy Chief of the General Staff, and a variety of others in the weeks following that. Really interesting people from a variety of backgrounds. Listen in, come and join us then. Great to have you on the series. Thanks, guys, and thank you, John.
Pleasure. Thank you both.
Bye-bye.